Good morning. My name is Jerry Smith. I'm an information security and privacy analyst for the University of Utah. I'm going to speak today on privacy and security. I'd like to kind of dedicate this to a buddy of mine who, on last year's presentation, which was my first for Utah Saint, was Rick Johnson. He and I were information security people for the state of Utah. He passed away last year. But he gave me my first congratulatory hoorah last year when I finished, which was kind of a difficult thing. As I said, though, he passed away last year. Just for everybody's trivia points, that picture is from LFA 7, which is in Wales. That's an F-15E. I've always wondered if that was photoshopped in, but I never could tell. Anyway, let's talk about privacy and security. In my job, I've worked in information security and privacy probably for about the last 25 years. I started out in mainframes as a computer operator back in the old days when we used to use index cards, or not index cards, but cards. And transition back into information security. Privacy, I've found, though, when I transitioned into privacy, is a different game. It's really nuanced. There's some differences. We use it at the hospital with HIPAA, and so there's some changes. There's differences with information security and privacy. I'd like to throw out a disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. I'm presenting this information as is. I throw this in because my boss says I need to make sure that we understand that what you're getting here is not legal advice. If you have any questions, talk to your in-house counsel, talk to your third-party counsel if you have one. Check with them before you do anything. This is as-is advice. I give it to you based on my experience in both the private side and the public side. I've worked for State of Utah, University of Utah, Zions Bank, O.C. Tanner. Controls for privacy and information security are implemented in two different ways, or in a variety of different ways, but they are different, and they're implemented differently. When HIPAA was first written, I'm providing this to you based on context, like I said, from the University of Utah's perception or context. The privacy side of the group, when they wrote it initially, they didn't trust information security to provide the information correctly. So privacy actually wrote their own specific side of the regulations because they didn't trust how information security was going to be put into place. So they wrote their own side of it, and then they got information security to write out their side of it. So there's two sides to HIPAA. There's the privacy side, and there's the information security side. So when you hear it referred to, there is the privacy rule, and there's the information security rule. And a lot of times that's what you'll hear when you go into the regulation. So there's this misconception that privacy and information security can be put together in one control set, which is incorrect. You have to use it, it has to be in two different ways. They're very, very different in control. Implement them in two different ways. Let's look at some definitions. Right. So how do you want me to take care of it? You'll have to come up here and do it for me. I don't know how to play with this, but I just want to make sure you're getting out there what you want to see. Okay. While he works on that, let me talk to you about this. Security systems, let's talk about some definition. Security systems are implemented in two different ways in the sense of information security provides, let's hold. Sorry, my machine took a power bump a couple days ago, and the settings have not come back yet.
Okay. Should be good. Does that work?
Oh, it works for me.
Is that going to mess you up here?
Nope.
Have to catch up to wherever you were at.
Okay.
I just want to make sure they can see.
Great, thanks. Let's get back to it. Security systems protects the privacy and information security and provides site integrity, confidentiality, and availability. We get back to the triad of information security. Information security policy, when put into place, provides overall information security and privacy posture, crucial to the business when trusted with the personal and highly private information of its consumer. That's the privacy side. Privacy policy protects the data and maintains the consumer's trust. Now, privacy, according to HHS, privacy is defined as appropriate use of data. Got to remember that when we use it. We use data, we create the appropriate use. Companies and vendors have data entrusted to them, and the data should be used according to the agreed purpose. So when a consumer provides data to you, you use it as what the agreed purpose. So from a medical standpoint, when they provide their medical data, you use it for a medical purpose. As in financial use, you use it for a financial purpose. You don't use it for anything else. What we run into, what happens is when data is used for another agreed purpose, another purpose, other than financial or medical, we run into problems, and that's when we have issues where data is used for something other than the agreed purpose. We have problems when regulators find data being used for other purposes, and that's when fines are incurred. Last year, HHS and the Office of Civil Rights, which is their enforcement arm, levied fines up to $26 million. That's a lot of change. And the problem with that is that OCR, when they levy a fine, that fine goes back into OCR's pocket. That's how they run that agency. It's like an ATM. It's their ATM. That's their operating budget. So when they come to you and hit you for a fine, it just goes back to them and they use it for their own purposes. Information security, if you remember, information security is made up of the three different parts: confidentiality, integrity, making sure that the data maintains integrity, and availability. The data is available for use. To me, information security and privacy is about a hearts and minds campaign. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have secure access, making sure that the data maintains the integrity, the availability, and protection on the data. Also, the idea is that we protect it, and then what we try and do is, for the privacy side, is we get access to the data and we get to the door. Privacy monitors, once you're into the application, that's where we get to the point where we use the privacy side. Privacy to me is information security wraps itself around an application, and then privacy monitors the inside of that application. It's a behavior-based process. Privacy protects the inside of the application and monitors what's inside the application. We protect the fine china. The other side of privacy, the other piece that privacy provides is our ability to do investigations. Privacy, even inside the information side, information security side, ultimately privacy is going to investigate breaches. We're the piece to go out and investigate when a breach occurs. And that's another aspect of our business. So when we talk about privacy, we're behavior-based. We look at the anomalies that occur when inside an application. Anomalous and odd behavior is something that we monitor inside an application based on what occurs. We use different applications to monitor that type of affair or that type of application. There's a variety of different applications that we can use. Protenus is one, Fair Warning, IATRIC, Secure Onyx, and Maze are some of the big applications that are in use these days for application monitoring. Some of them become very sophisticated. Protenus and Maze especially have behavior-based analytics that have become what I would say very cutting edge and using almost AI-based application monitoring. Protenus especially seems to be getting into the big data application and AI-based approach where they are actually getting very sophisticated in their approach. Protenus especially seems to be very cutting edge on that side of it. They're looking at a lot of different aspects and giving you visibility into a variety of different applications within the enterprise. It used to be that the applications being used for insider view inside an enterprise was pretty much constrained. You essentially were a consumer of information within inside the enterprise. Nowadays, the applications have gotten to the point where you have much more visibility of looking into the enterprise as versus just being a consumer. You now have the ability to go out and have visibility into the various applications because the hooks have been built and giving you the ability to actually look into the various applications that exist. You have the ability to look into the various, and as again, this is from a hospital or a medical environment. You have the ability to look into the PACS system, which is the X-ray system, the imaging sections. You have the ability to look into the billing side, the insurance side, the ability to look into the scheduling side, the database side. Before, you had to take images, you had to take information, say, from the data warehouse. And so it was difficult to discern what was actually happening within inside the system. But the other side of this is nowadays, we need to start using our employees as part of this process. Now, a lot of people have got hesitancy about using employees as part of our process. My feeling is that if we don't use employees, we're really wasting an aspect of an asset that we can really use. But let's move on to the technical side. I've always looked at information security as holding the technology side as the main part of their tool set. We've got technology using firewalls, VPN tunnels, a variety of rules on routers, policy-based information. But I think that technology only goes so far. That's why I think that we need to bring people into this mix. We can't look at the user as being not as an asset. We need to look at them as being something that we add to the mix. They are a protection piece. The thing that I think that we're looking at is we're always looking at a small group of players, especially internally and externally. My feeling is that internally, we've always got a small group of actors that we've got that are always testing the boundaries. I almost feel like it's an 80-20 or maybe a 90-10 process. We've got 10% of our population of employees that are always testing the boundaries. They're always the ones that are at you for policy. They're the ones that look at you and say, where is it in policy? Where is it that I have to actually do this? Where is it that I can't do that or I can't do this? I think the same thing says that from the external side. It's 10% of the population of bad actors that are the sophisticated side that are always trying to penetrate your environment. They're the ones that are breaking in. They're the ones that are always inside your environment that are testing you and going after you. And I think that that's what we're looking at, is we've got sophisticated bad actors at a 10% rate that are coming in, and 10% of our internal employees that if you give them an inch, they're going to take your arm off. So I think that if we can combine privacy and information security into a cohesive group, a cohesive voice, we can have some business success. If we limit access to align with business need, and that's where we speak with one voice. We speak with a voice that aligns with business, we can have some success. We need to open a dialogue with the information security team. Too often, I don't see information security and privacy syncing up. They don't speak with one voice. They don't speak with a cohesive alignment. If information security would just attend a few privacy seminars, I think it'd help. I think it'd help if they could speak with that one voice and align with business. There's what's known as the Fair Information Privacy Practices, which I'll show in just a minute. The other thing of it is I think that we need to start with an opt-in process versus an opt-out. Opt-in is allow people to opt in to a process. As a consumer, when you're first getting involved with an organization, give them the opportunity to check off to be allowed into a process. Don't send them the card to say opt out of it. They have to check off to get out of the process. I know that that's an active process, but to them, I think that we want to give them the opportunity to get out of it, to stay out of it, as versus get out of it. I know that that's tough, but I think that's the way to go. Now, these are the goals of fair information privacy practices. Transparency. Transparency allows the consumer or the customer the ability to see what's going on. Individual participation. That gets back to the idea of allowing the customer the ability to participate. Purpose specification. That gets back to the idea of allow them to see what's going on. Allow them to get involved. Data minimization. It gets back to the idea of just use their data for just what it's used for. The minimum amount of data. Use limitations. That's the idea of just using it for what it's supposed to be used for. Don't use it for anything else. Maintain quality and integrity. Maintain security. Don't lose it. Accountability and auditing. Make sure that the people that use it are accountable and that you maintain auditing. That's straightforward stuff. Okay, so I've got some good news. Last year, I got a letter from a company that I used to work for 20 years ago. The letter indicated to me that they were part of a breach. The breach was that a payroll clerk had uploaded 30 years of data for employees to a Dropbox account. 30 years of data for employees, socials, tax information, what else? Everything. All those tax records. I'd worked for that company for 10 years. Excuse me for one sec. My mouth has gone dry thinking about this. I'd worked for that company for 10 years. I'm going to be 60 this year. I'm never going to recover from that breach. I just am never going to have time. But everything had been uploaded to that. And the thing that irritated me when I talked to that general counsel was the lack of concern. There was absolutely none. And the thing that was irritating about that was that they could not spend the money on employee awareness. That's a simple one. That's a simple employee awareness. I mean, who uploads payroll information to a Dropbox account? Nobody. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dave. Who uploads data to a Dropbox account? Do you? You better not. Dave. Because I'll be breaking somebody's kneecaps the next time I find out about it. Anyway, that was a simple one. That's a simple fix. That's employee awareness. That's a few $1,000s of training dollars to make somebody aware. And that's why I think that we need to loop our employees into the fix. Because as I understand it, what the word is that the courts are starting to look at, if you offer credit monitoring, that's some indication now that that's showing harm, which could make you possibly a litigant in class action. I don't know if it's going to happen, but it'd be nice if it would, because I'd sign on in a split second. Anyway, my tale of woe. Let's talk about, oops, I hope I didn't break anything. Anyway, let's talk about breach analysis. One of the things we do in breach analysis as part of our investigation is we look at the nature and extent of the PHI and the PII that's involved in the breach. We look at the identifiers and the re-identification risk. Now, as I said, this is part of what we do in our breach, which is typically resolving around PHI. We look at unauthorized user or unauthorized recipients. We then look at, was it actually accessed or used? Now, the interesting thing, I don't know how many of you are actually involved with PHI or PII. I don't know if you saw, but there was an organization who lost control of PII, PHI, in a ransomware attack. They did the analysis, and they said that they didn't get breached. They lost a lot of records. And their analysis was that they didn't lose control. HHS says if you lose administrative control of your records, you've had a breach. So it's going to be interesting to see what happened. We've always maintained that if you lose administrative control, you've lost control. So I'm really going to be interested to see how this breaks out. To me, it's if you lose administrative control, you've got a breach. And that's the way it's always worked. I think they're dancing on a different tune, but we'll see. Factor 4 is the extent risk to PHI has been mitigated. For us, we look at a timeline. The amount of time you have to report to HHS is 60 days. If you exceed 500, you have to report within a short period of time to HHS and let them know that you've had a breach. You also have to report to local media that you've had a breach. Now, the thing that you have to worry about with breaches is possible class action, fines or penalties, embarrassment or harm to the individual. If you remember, the University of Utah had a situation happen where we lost control of some tapes because a third-party vendor was transporting those tapes to an off-site location and left them in the car. Somebody stole them. They thought that they were 8-track tapes. They tried to use them as 8-track tapes. They weren't 8-track tapes. What's funny about that is that if they tried to use them as tapes, it wouldn't have worked. They couldn't have read them anyway. I mean, I don't know who has an IBM 3090 lying around to read them, but they didn't. So you couldn't have read them anyway. Damage or reputation to the harm of the organization. That's always a really funny variable. I've read different things. Sometimes there's harm, sometimes there's not. Typically there is. Typically there is quite a bit of harm. People are starting to walk away from organizations that don't protect their data. So think about that. it's going to be a problem. Loss of trust between the organization and the customer, it happens. I mean, if you're not going to take care of their data, they're going to walk. They may. That's why I think we need to value our employees. They're their front line. They're the people that are going to know the difference. They're the ones that are going to have the best idea if you have a problem. I always think of them as being a tripwire. Remember, in ransomware cases, they're the ones that are going to see it first. They're the ones that are going to suddenly say to you, I've got this funny thing on my screen that says pay such and such amount. They're the ones that are going to see it. Remember, in the Midwest, there was one case where a ransomware attack started. They shut down their entire system. So think about that. You want your employees to have knowledge. You want them to know what's going on. They're really effective. If you can just train them basically to make decisions, to have the right understanding of things. And if you keep them updated, let them know what's going on. Let them know where the threats are at. And you've got to let them know about the worth of the data. Your data is everything. Your data is what keeps you in business. If you don't protect your data and your customers don't, if your employees don't recognize the value of that data and they don't take ownership of that data, then it's nothing. If they look at that data as just bits and numbers, pieces of paper, then it's lost on them. You've got to get them to recognize the value. You've got to get them to take ownership of that data. You need them to recognize, to respect it. Once again, I was talking about the products, Fair Warning, Iatric, Maze, Secure Onyx, and Protenus. I actually have talked to the founder of Protenus, Robert Lord, and Maze. For some reason, I can't remember the gentleman's name that ran Maze. He's an interesting person. He actually developed it based on some experiences that he had as a developer. And it was interesting how he came up with the idea. He's from Indiana, and he wrote it in a really interesting way in his development pattern. And he's really put a lot of thought into it. So if you're looking for privacy products, they're really starting to get into some cutting-edge stuff. I would really seriously think about it. I know it's a lot of money, but if you're thinking about it, try it out. Once again, think about your employees. They're an asset. Use them. You know, you don't have to spend a lot of money on them. Get them to recognize the ownership of it. Get them to recognize that they need to recognize the value of the data. It helps protect it. It helps them make the right decisions. It also gives you a tripwire. It gives you a tripwire in the event that something goes wrong, because all the technology in the world is not going to catch everything. It'll help you catch maybe something that leaks through that you don't see. Like I said, this is a hearts and mind thing. We want the employees to get involved in hearts and minds. Technology is ever increasing. The cost keeps going up. Your employees, with a few bucks towards training, you can catch it. You can make some money off of that. And it only takes once for a breach. Like I said, $26 million last year for OCR. And the thing to think about with training considerations, are you obtaining the data in a safe manner? Did you secure it correctly? Are you storing it correctly? Did you follow the proper procedures? Are you using for the PII for the purpose it was intended? Are you using minimum necessary? Minimum necessary is a key factor to keep in mind. Are you using it? Are you getting it through a secure means? Are you encrypting in place? Are you encrypting at rest? Are you encrypting over the wire? if there's one lesson that I could pass along, you know how we talk about location, location, location in real estate? Encryption, encryption, encryption. If you can do anything, encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. Encrypt on your hard drives. Encrypt. Don't give away anything for free. If you can do TLS, do it. Encrypt your hard drives. You've got to. That's what everybody expects. I know it's a pain. I know it's hard, but encrypt. Whatever you can do. Make sure that you're, as I said, make sure you're using minimum necessary. Make sure that if you're sharing that it's allowed. Check your rights. Make sure that the rights are correct. Like I said, check on the rights. Minimum necessary. Make sure that the safeguards are in place. I get back to encryption. Make sure that you've got the correct retention schedule. Don't keep data around that you don't need. Get rid of it. If you've got data that you're storing for no reason, get rid of it. Don't store it. If you don't need it, get rid of it. If it only needs to be there for 6 years, fine. But once you don't need it for any longer, get rid of it. There's no reason to keep data around that you don't need. I know people like to save it, but if you don't need it, get rid of it. Throw it away. Make sure you throw it away correctly. Shred it. Shred it. Take it to disposal. Take that hard drive, break it apart. Do whatever you need to do. Get rid of it correctly, but get rid of it. There's no reason to keep that stuff. Because what'll happen is somebody will find it, and there'll be something on it that you shouldn't have had on it, and they'll use it against you. Remember that, think about email like this. There's a quote that I saw one time. Email, you should send email like it's going to be used as a tool of discovery at some point in time. Don't email anything that you want in a legal action. So keep that in mind. Always remember, if you're going to return something, make sure you dispose of it correctly. So help your employees understand the implications of privacy and information security. Make sure that they roll it into their daily procedures. Training empowers people. It helps them make right decisions. Information and security should talk with one voice. Privacy and information security. Campaign together. Policy. Make sure the policy is enforceable. Don't write down things that are just words on the page. When government agencies come in and they find that you've written down a policy that is not enforceable, they will hit you doubly hard. That's what happens to organizations that do not put an enforceable policy in. It's even worse if you can't enforce it. Make sure that the policy is communicated through the organization. They will go around that organization, and if you don't know and if you have employees that don't know what the policy is, the same thing will occur. They'll hit you doubly hard. You have to make sure that everyone understands what it means, at least the basics. Integrate the policy together with information security and privacy. If it's two separate pieces, it'll make it that hard to understand. Make sure that it's aligned in a common language. Don't get too legal on it. Don't make it so, don't make it so difficult to understand that your employees can't understand it. Also, things to avoid: wrong location. Make sure it's in the right place. Make sure you're pointing at the right data. Make sure that it's got the right link. The first time you put up a policy and doesn't have the right link, and a regulatory agent looks at it and it comes up with a 404 error, they're going to check it off, and that's going to be the end of that. I used to do IRS when I worked for the state, I did the IRS audits, and I had one that had that, and they hit the wrong link, and it was so annoying because I had the web people put it up on the right link, and it's such a simple error. Wrong technology. It means you're promising the wrong technology in your policy. Wrong promise. You promise that there will never be a breach. Of course, there's going to be one. Wrong guarantee. I guarantee that there'll never be a breach. Of course, that's never going to happen. Wrong version. You're using the wrong version of the policy. Wrong training. I promise that I will train everybody. Wrong. Wrong practice. Same thing. Always make sure that your policy demonstrates just exactly what you're going to do. Make sure, at least try to add privacy to your vocabulary. Privacy is a key component of how you control and protect sensitive data. Privacy is a hearts and mind campaign. Let's get back to that. Train to your employees to utilize the key concepts of the fair information privacy practice. That gets back to transparency. Recognize privacy provides protection to your organizational assets. Use your employees as a piece of that privacy protection. I'm going to get into some cloud information here, so give me a break and we'll try and talk about that because that is new technology. Make sure that the discussion of cloud service providers, CSPs, that privacy is part of that discussion. Ensure that IT security understand that a service level agreement is part of that relationship between the CSP, the organization, the business associate agreement, the BAA, and a service level agreement. Oftentimes, your CSP may look at the data once it goes up into the cloud, is their data. Make sure that you look at that agreement and make sure that you have who is the owner of that data once it goes into the cloud. Because some CSPs look at that data as being theirs. So make sure you have a clear understanding of who is owner of the data. Because when you write the BAA, make sure that the that the SLA overrides and has clear understanding of that. And make sure that the ownership of that data is clearly defined. And that essentially is that for me. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Why don't you repeat that question for me again? We do it, our organization wants it delivered through online. Their feeling is that they want it as quickly as possible. We were doing some video. They have gotten rid of the video and we only do snapshots now. Because they want it done as quickly as possible. And so it's as fast as we can. We integrate it with a monthly meeting, and we do also a weekly intense huddle with hot topics of the week. So we'll talk about what's going on, and then from my side, because I do the technical side, I'll talk about threats that I see going on, and I do a blog about various things. So we hopefully catch everything that we can. Information security guys have a tendency not to... I always was hesitant to talk about information security. Because there's always a problem about getting over people's heads, I always thought. Chicken Little syndrome. So we try and keep it broad and general. Yes, sir. use LMS, and we upload content to it. We have a training manager that does it. I'm sure she'd share. If you want to, I can give her your name. I know training is a tough one. Everybody's busy. My wife, who was an executive, always preaches to me about talking about training, that nobody's got time. That's why you've got to limit it. That's why I have such heartache with the company that breached my information. That's a short one. Yes, sir. It's based on the idea that there's so much information in the pipeline. My feeling is that my information is in inventory, and it's going to be a while before it ever gets out. So my thinking is I may not see my information for maybe 5 years. So I'll probably be 65 when it hits. By then, what am I going to do? They're talking about to repair something like that, $3,000 or $5,000. By then, what am I going to do? I guess I'm just really irritated. Like I said, it's a kneecap thing. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Well, the reality of it is cloud's it. I presented last year at the HIPAA Summit, and I used the analogy that I used when wireless started. It's like swallowing poison. If you can control the dose, you can survive poison. But to me, cloud is, let's face it, it's a moneymaker. So if you can figure it out, if you can configure, and I think you can, the first thing you got to have in the medical side is a BAA. And we actually got a BAA with Amazon, which I was really surprised about, because I didn't think they'd do it, but they did. And so we got the BAA, and I should say we got a BAA with AES. They're very, very specific, very narrow, very tightly constrained. We've got the logging, we've got the protection, we've got the certification, and we've got stuff moving up to them. So I think it's going to work. So from that standpoint, it's going to work out. So yeah. Well, think about it from the infrastructure standpoint. I mean, I have to do what the business says. The business says, this is what we're going to do. Get on board, And when they say get on board, that means me. And I have to make it work. And if I can make it work, and I can get the right signatures, and I can get the right buy-in, then I'm going to get on board. We've got it. And think about it from the standpoint of I can get rid of a lot of things. I can get rid of a lot of hardware. I can get rid of a lot of licensing. I can get rid of the constant turnaround and turnover of hardware and licensing. So there's some money to be made in that side. To me, it's a clear choice. you know? So it's like, yeah, what am I? I mean, Mama raised a drunk, not a fool, you know? I may be the business impediment department, but I'm not an idiot. Any other questions? Thanks, folks. I appreciate your time, and sorry for the technical screw-up earlier. Took me a bit to get around that, but I appreciate it. If you have any other questions, jerry.smith@utah.edu. I'm happy to answer your questions. I can lead you astray, or I can find somebody that'll lead you astray. Thanks very much.